In the Process Insights video about the 7 enablers of BPM, I said that all 7 are equally important. And that's absolutely true. And some are more important than others. One in particular, process architecture. Because if we can't visualize our processes, there's nothing else we can do. We need to get to the minimum viable architecture as soon as possible and have a good mechanism for maintenance and further development as required. If we are to do good process management to enable good process improvement, we must first make our processes visible. We need an enterprise process architecture. In this video, I want to walk through how I work with clients to discover and document an enterprise process architecture. Of course, in this short video format, we can't cover all of the details, but I hope I can give you some useful insights. So let's start with a quick reminder of what we mean by a process architecture. It has these 3 broad areas at the highest level. At the top, we see shared management processes. At the bottom, we have shared support processes. And in the middle are our core processes. Management and support processes are shared because they're shared across the core, and the core processes are those that are directly executing our corporate strategy. So we've got 4 core, highest level core processes here we're showing. You'll see the top one there is care for patients. So let's have a look at what care for patients might look like when we decompose it down 2 more levels we're showing here now. So the yellow boxes are the next level, the second level of processes, and the white boxes the third level. So this is the way in which we build the process architecture and the way in which we'll ultimately use it as well. It gives us insight into all of those cross-functional processes by which we're executing our strategy. But how do we get there? How do we actually build the process architecture? They always look good when they're finished, but not so easy to see them when it's a blank sheet of paper or a blank screen. So how do we do it? So continuing with the hospital analogy, you start with the strategy, whatever the strategic intent document looks like, mission, vision, purpose statement, whatever it is. And we'll go through, and I would literally be going through with a highlighter pen on paper or the equivalent on a screen, looking for the verbs. Because the verbs will give us some sense of the promises we make. And that's what we're looking to identify. Promises we make and to whom they're made. So here we can see we've identified 2 verbs. They both happen to be provide in this simple example of the mission statement. Now, what are we providing? Well, we provide care and we provide education and research. This is a teaching hospital, remember. So this is giving us some sense of what the highest level core processes are going to be, and we can work on that and have lots of conversation about it, and we'll end up with a set of highest level core processes. Now, sadly, it's not as easy as just going click, here they are, but it really is a matter of talking it through and understanding the nuances and coming up with the right words. And I think particularly for core processes, it's useful to have words that resonate with the people in the organisation, words that have come kind of organically out of the conversations about what is it we do and to whom do we do it and how does the strategy actually get executed in the real world. So you'll see we've got 4 high-level core processes there. The first one, care for patients, that's obvious, it's a hospital. We develop healthcare professionals, that's the education piece. We create and apply knowledge, that's the research. Now, when that was first put up, that said, conduct research. Perfectly reasonable, if plain and simple process name, but with some conversation looking at what's the outcomes of research. It was about creating and applying knowledge. So we ended up with that, I think, much improved process name. So lots of conversation that comes up with the right name in the end. Now you'll see we've got a 4th one there. One of the things we're doing all the time when we're going through architecture is saying, okay, have we covered everything? Is there anything we do that's not covered? And we had that conversation at one point where we only had the first 3 processes there. And someone said, well, we go out to schools and businesses and shopping malls and we do things like free blood pressure checks. And they're not patients, so it's not care for patients. In fact, that activity is about trying to stop them becoming patients. So we need another process. So again, lots of conversation, and we came up with that process name, Develop Wellness Awareness, which is a really powerful name, I think, isn't it? It really says what we're trying to do. So that's the kind of conversations that we have to build that, and over a whole process architecture development, that's something like 10 workshops, and my workshops would be 2 hours each, something like that, just to give you a sense of the effort that I think is involved. So here's 3 key tips, things we need to keep in mind as we're building the process architecture. We always start with the top and we decompose our way down as far as we need to. Technically, you can start at the bottom and work your way up, but it's hard, it's time consuming, it doesn't give you a good result, and it's frustrating. So why would you try and do that? When if you start from the top, it's much quicker to do, makes more sense, gives you an architecture where every process has a line of sight back to the strategy. It's easier to do, people get more involved in it. It's just an easier and better thing to do, so why wouldn't you start at the top? We need to be careful about the terms we use in our process names, because you will usually discover that there's one or two words that mean different things to different people, and it might be the first time they've realised that. So some sort of glossary of terms would be useful, or even better still, a more sophisticated concept model. If you don't have that to hand, then you might want to start retaining some definitions of the words that you're using if there's any contention about it. The other thing to think about all the time when we're not only building but using a process architecture is that it's telling us what we do, not who does it. This is not the org chart. I've done a separate video comparing org charts and process architectures. You might like to track that down. But all of the time, we're not interested in who does it. So when we're doing these process architecture workshops, the organisation chart isn't even in the room. It has no role to play. So there's 3 important tips about how to build a process architecture. Now, we've been talking mainly, though, about core processes, haven't we? And in this image here, this is the diagram that we start with in my workshops. And you can see that the core processes are unnamed. It's empty. And that's because we're going to develop each of those organically through the workshops. But the management and support processes, let's zoom in a bit, you can see that that's already populated. And that's because this is a great time to use reference models. Now, I use a reference model, as you're seeing here, which I've developed over many projects and many years, but any reference model can be applied in here, and it's a very good place to do it. I'm not so keen on reference models for the core processes because, as I say, I like those names to come out of the conversation, to resonate with the people in the organisation. Just remember that a reference model, by definition, is everybody else's processes. You might want your core processes at least to sound familiar in your own internal language. So here we are, we start with the reference model here, and we'll look at each one in turn. So up the top here in management, we've got maintain strategy. Do we do that? Yes, we do. Is this what we call it? Yes, we do. Okay, leave it in, move on. So we'll work our way through all of these, asking those same questions. We might come to one where we say, okay, advise government. Now, if you're a government agency, you probably do that. If you're not, then you probably don't. So no, we don't do it. Okay, cross it out and move on. So we work our way through the support processes in the same way. Here we are, procure goods and services. Almost everyone does that. Is this what we want to call it? Yes, it is. Fine, let's move on. So we'll just work our way through the template saying, do we do this? Is this what we want to call it? If it is what we want to call it, then we're done. If we don't do it, then we move on. If we need to change the name, we change the name. So that's a reasonably simple exercise to do. Now, at the end of all of that, we do need to say, okay, is there anything that's not in the template that we do? Let's pop back to the hospital for a moment. You can see a support process down here called minimise infection risk. That's a big deal in a hospital. It's been a big deal in our own organisations in recent times as well. But you can see that this is an important ongoing process in a hospital. It's not in the template because it's not something that applies generally. So we have the conversation, say, what do we need to add? Well, in the hospital case, we needed to add another process about managing infection risk, and then we need to understand what it is we're going to call it, have a conversation about that. So that lets us end up with a nice set of management and support processes at this highest level. We've got 2 levels here to show how that fits together with the core. So we're starting to build the process architecture. And by the way, the project that I use to build a process architecture, I call it the Reimagine project. And if you want to know more about that, there are 2 documents below. One is just a 2-page summary, an overview, and then the other one is a project description, a longer document that'll give you more details about how we do it, including some example timetables and that sort of thing. So how can we summarize some of this? It's about discovering, and I think discovery is a good word to use in relation to the process architecture, because we do need to dig around a little and discover what we're going to call the processes and how they all fit together. And we start with the strategy always. We want to know what the promises are and to whom they're made, and that'll give us our highest level processes, and then we can decompose our way down from that. So it's always starting with the strategy. It's always top down. And then you can drill down as far as you need to, but we're always drilling down. And when I'm doing this anyway, from a startup point of view, where we don't have a process architecture, the first one we would build would have 3 levels. I think that's a nice body of work. It's usually something like 250 to 350 processes, including management, core and support, to those 3 levels. It depends how many highest level core processes you've got. but it's in that range of 250 to 350 processes. That might sound like a lot of work, but we usually get this done in 2 or 3 months, so let's call it 10 weeks of a series of workshops. So it doesn't take forever, and it can't do in our organisations, can it? And at that point, we've got a working process architecture, and then we can socialise it more, and we can debate and argue about it, and we let it evolve, and it will change. That doesn't mean we got it right, it just means we keep improving it. And that sort of evolution is going to go forever. We talk a lot about continuous management and continuous improvement of our processes. Well, forever is what it means by continuous. Thanks for joining me for this Process Insight. Hope you found it useful. If so, there are plenty more in the series. Do you have a process architecture in your organisation? Are you using it? Perhaps you're developing one. Maybe you disagree about even needing one. Don't be shy. You have my contact details. I love debating and discussing process matters with people around the world. Also, please let me know what other topics you'd like me to cover in these videos. Thanks for sharing this time with me. If you'd like to continue the conversation, I'd love to hear from you.